Photography in the studio is something that has been around since the invention of photography and has always been associated with professional photographers. Over the last few years, it has changed quite dramatically, however, with the advancement of smartphone technology, and more photographers are turning to using their smartphones in the studios due to their portability, their ease of use, and the ability to get very close into your subject and to be able to post up straight away. We can photograph nearly everything in the studio, from food, jewellery, newborn photography, beauty photography, and of course traditional portraiture. And over these next two lessons, I am going to show you how you can photograph all of these different subjects and potentially start a small photography business for yourself. All you need is your smartphone, a couple of lights, and a little bit of business know-how. My name is William Eames, your course educator as always, and welcome back to the Diploma in Smartphone Photography. So welcome to the first part of our studio photography, where we're going to concentrate on photographing products and food and smaller items with our smartphones. So we've got lots lined up over these two lessons. There's a huge amount that we can do with our smartphones when it comes to professional quality studio photography. It's an area that's really advanced over the last few years in terms of lighting and accessories, to the point that we can realistically use our smartphones now in professional studio environments. So let's have a look at what we're going to cover throughout this lesson. We'll have a look at our lighting, our light accessories, and there's a lot available for our phones. We'll talk about backdrops, we'll talk about color theory, very important, especially when it comes to photographing smaller objects like jewellery and food. We'll talk about arrangement styling, and of course tricks of the trade, where how we can fake our food photography using household items essentially. So kicking things off, let's have a look at our lighting and accessories, and starting with perhaps the most obvious thing we should always consider when we're photographing anything using lighting, whether it's artificial lighting or natural lighting, is how we want to light the subject. Are we going to use key lighting? Are we going to use fill lighting? So remember, key lighting is when we have one primary light that is highlighting our subject, and is typically shot, not always, but typically shot against a dark background, like in this example here. Fill lighting is when we have a bit more of a balanced photograph. We've got perhaps multiple lights. We're trying to balance out the light so that there's perhaps not many very hard shadows. Or we've got kind of a nice bright photograph, and is typically used with white backgrounds, but also very colourful backgrounds as well. So if you want to add a lot of colour into your photo, you would typically use fill lighting over key lighting. So the first accessory I would recommend that you have a look at, it would be a simple flash diffuser. So as you can see here, it's just an attachment that will go over the flash of your phone, and it'll help to spread that flashlight. As we know, the flashes on our smartphones, they're very small, they don't throw around much light, and that light is usually very hard because it's such a small area. But adding a diffuser means that the light hits the diffusion material, whether it's plastic, sometimes it can be kind of more of a kind of a felt type of texture, and it helps to spread out that light. So it'll help to kind of reduce the power of it somewhat, but it will also help to spread it out even more. Now it'll mean, it's not great for doing subjects that are very far away, but if you're doing selfies, or you're using the front camera or the rear camera, whichever one you want, it will really help to soften that light and reduce shadows, and they're very affordable as well. So you might find that you get a little bit more use out of your flash when you are using a flash diffuser. So that would be a good starting point when it comes to very basic simple lighting setup. If you don't want to invest too much money into your lighting at this stage, I would check out a simple flash diffuser. Something that is a little bit more complex, but also a lot more expensive, unfortunately, are off-camera flash. Okay, so basically, as you can see here, very much illustrated in the photograph, this is a simple a box of light essentially. It's also a flash unit too. It can be a constant light or it can be used as a flash unit where we can simply move it around using our hands, or of course you can set it up using a little tripod or something like that as well, and it means you can control direction of the light. Okay, so with this one here, it's very useful for portrait photography in particular, where you perhaps don't want that light just falling directly on your subject. You want to light them from a certain angle. As you can see here as well, we've got that kind of conical shape here too, which really helps to throw and spread out that light, which will create very soft shadows in the photograph. So one of these is very, very useful if you're doing portrait photography in particular, but of course it can be used for a variety of different purposes. The Profoto one that I have displayed here, popular one, the C1 or the C2 unit, but you are looking at about $200 for it, so it is very expensive. So do check them out online, because you can really get some fairly spectacular results with them, and the ability to be able to move your flash off the camera and also have a more powerful flash will make a significant difference to your portrait photography. Now, moving away from them, we also have our ring lights. Typically these are used for portraits, but they can be used for a variety of purposes as well. These are used very much in vlogging, so if you ever do a little bit of vlogging or you're just trying to get a better quality selfie, a ring light is the way to go. As you can see here, couple of different variations in terms using the tripods. You've got one there where you can attach the phone to it, so it's actually the light's coming down on you. The angle of that light there as well will help to add a little bit of shadow, but nothing too hard. And you can see here you can change it, from kind of different warmer light to just your standard kind of daylight to softer light. So there's different types of lighting effects that you can get out of these as well, and these are very, very useful for doing things like vlogging in that as well. Here's a slight variation of it, but as you can see here, if you have a look at the image on the phone itself, it does give a nice even spread of light, particularly a key light type of effect here as well. But what it'll also do, it'll give you a really nice catch light in the eyes. So the light that we see reflected off our eyes, very noticeable when we're doing studio photography, is known as a catch light. And a ring light is quite desirable as a catch light because it frames the eyes, it frames the pupils. So that can be a look that you might want to obtain. Definitely check out ring lights. You can pick them up again for quite cheap, but as usual, you get what you pay for. So you could try them out quite cheap and then upgrade to a much better one down the line if you find that it's something that you find to be very, very useful. Another light source that's very, very handy and very, very popular are the constant LED lights. So these would again particularly be used when it comes to recording, but can also just be used as a light source for your photography as well. This is a light source that's always on, so basically it's like switching on a light bulb. It'll just stay on until you switch it off, so there's no pop-up flash or anything like that. But LED lights will offer a kind of a cool color temperature. You might need to do a little bit of white balancing with them. You can also get daylight balanced LED lights as well, which are exactly what they say. They are designed to give a daylight type of effect. The Manfrotto brand that I have pictured here as well, they're very, very good too. Manfrotto are a great brand when it comes to mobile photography as well. They do a nice range of lenses. They're mostly known for their tripods, but they do a huge amount of other accessories as well. But LED lights are great for macro because you can get quite close into them, into your subject without a pop of or burst of flash. Particularly if you're photographing insects, that can disturb them, so this might be a better way to go. Food and close-up product photography as well, and it's great because you can kind of see what you're doing, instantly with them as well. And again, very, very good for vlogging. Obviously, they can be kind of front-facing or rear-facing depending on the use that you have in particular for it. Product photography in particular, I'm sure you've come across these before. Light boxes designed especially for small products. They're available with the lights built in, or you can get ones where you can remove the lights and kind of move them around if you need to. They're very simple to set up, and in general the light source is constant. There's no flash. Sometimes you'll get ones with a burst of flash, but they're kind of unnecessary, really. As you can see here, they're very straightforward to use, and it's easy to kind of pop in different color backgrounds. Or if you want to change the color post editing, that's also very easy to do as well, because you have a white background, and it's very easy to copy and cut in a different color background if needs be. Something we'll have a look at a much later stage. But they're quite affordable. They can start from about $40, and they can obviously go much higher depending on the quality, the type of the light box that you're after, the size of the light box that you're after as well. But they're very much just set up and go, quite straightforward to use, and they're very effective. So, if you are running an online shop, you do things like design jewelry, or, you're selling kind of small trinkets, anything like that, I would strongly recommend that you have a look at investing in a light box, because they're very much designed for that kind of, catalog type of photography, where you've got objects repeated, you might need to photograph them from different angles and so on. So very straightforward and simple to use. Now, moving on to something a little bit more larger, we'll be talking about our professional quality studio lights. So we're talking about, if you're photographing in a larger studio type of environment, or perhaps you want to be visiting clients' homes and photographing in their homes as well, you might look at a setup like this. These are constant studio lights. So this means that they're always on. There's no pop of flash. They're not strobe lights. There's no sync cables or wireless triggers needed. So there's no kind of cables to fall over apart from your power cable. But this means, they're just simply on all the time. Again, if you think about like our standard lights, you switch them on, they stay on, until you switch them off. So constant light sources. Now, they can also be modified with different powers and so on as well. As you can see here with the lights, you've got this kind of weird array of lights, but they can actually be changed to only switch on, whichever amount of lights you want, so that it does change the type of the power that's coming out of it. They're easy to use in shape, using different modifiers. They're much more affordable than strobes as well, and the lights are very easily replaced. Now, they can get very hot in long portrait sessions, so if you do have them switched on for a very long time, do just be aware that the light bulbs themselves will actually become very warm. Usually they are sold with the soft box kind of attachment here, which is typically what they're used for. So if you're doing kind of more type of fill lighting type of photographs, if you're photographing say newborns, which we'll be speaking about in the next lesson, you'd be using these types of lights, but they're not as powerful or fast as strobes, which realistically isn't going to be too much of a problem when it comes to smartphone photography, but if you are photographing using DSLRs and that, you're looking to do very high speed photography, you'd need to be looking at using strobe photography instead. Speaking of strobes then, so strobes are essentially a large flash unit, an external flash source. They are a little bit more complex to use. There's no TTL, so again, this is something really to do with DSLRs, but it means you're manually setting them up. Okay, so you're not controlling them through the phone or through the camera. You're pretty much manually setting them up. So you need to use a sync cable or a wireless trigger, which you won't be using a sync cable with your phones, but you can absolutely use a wireless trigger, which we'll have a look at in a second. Very expensive, but they're very powerful, and they're very fast flash duration as possible. So if you are looking to do really high speed photography, you'd be looking at using a strobe unit like this, and ultimately will simply offer much more control. But they would be certainly much more of the professional quality, the much higher end quality. And unless you're really planning on getting into doing, editorial type of fashion or opening a photography studio for yourself, I would still recommend that you start off with the constant light source first of all, and then upgrade to strobes when you feel a little bit more comfortable. And they can also be used outside of the studio setting using a battery pack. Now, we can trigger them using a flash trigger. So as you can see here in the image, so the photographer using the smartphone, we have a flash trigger there, which is synced to the phone and also synced to the light here as well. So basically when the photographer takes the photograph, it sends a signal to the flash trigger, and which will trigger off the flash unit, will trigger off the strobe. And all of that happens in an instant. So there's no delay between it at all. And as you can see here as well, you can control on the top of the Godot one here, you can control the power of the light and everything as well. So they're for use with strobes or flash units, allows off-camera flash inside or outside the studio, but they are expensive. You will be paying a lot of money for them. They can also be used with different brands of strobes. Generally, these flash triggers are designed to be used with different types of lighting, so you don't have to stick with the same brand. And they can be used to trigger multiple lights. So in the setup here, we've got one light. You can also see a reflector there just behind the photographer too. But it's one light setup, but you can use them with multiple lights. So well, we'll have a look at that right now. So say, for example, we have our smartphone. We've got it on a tripod. It's sending a signal out to our flash trigger. The flash trigger will then send a signal out to the light. So the first light is called the master light. Okay, so it's the master light. This is, I suppose, the light that will receive the signal and will send it to the other lights. So unfortunately, the other lights are called slave units. So we've got our master unit and we've got our slave units, and you can have multiple slave units. So when the flash trigger is triggered, it'll send a signal off to the master light, which will then also send a signal off to the slave units. That can be done via radio frequencies, or usually it's done optically. So, you know, it'll send a pre-flash out that the other units see and will trigger then. And this all happens instantaneously. This all happens faster than you can see. When that signal is sent out, the flash will go off at the same time. So very, very simple to use, and it's a great way of getting into more complicated lighting setups, which we'll have a look at in our next lesson. But if you ever wondered how it works, and a lot of people do wonder how it works when it comes to studio photography, it's all about just sending signals out from your smartphone to a trigger, which then sends that out to the master light and sends it out all to the other lights, and everything happens in an instant. Okay, so then we've also got our reflectors. As I mentioned, there was just behind the photographer. And if there's one bit of equipment that I recommend that you buy when it comes to doing any type of photography, whether it's portrait, whether it's product or anything like that, it's a reflector. It's such a versatile piece of equipment. Reflectors bounce light. They're used to lift shadows and they're used to balance light. They're widely used in portraiture, but you can absolutely use them in any other type of photography as well. They typically come as a 5-in-1 set for about €50, $50. 5-in-1 set, so you've got a gold one, you have a silver one, there's kind of a charcoal type one, there's a white one, and I forget what the last one is, but they will kind of just have slightly different effects on the light. You know, your white one is just bouncing your standard daylight or whatever light it is that you happen to have pointed on it. Your silver one will add a coolness to your shadows. Your gold one will add a warmth to your shadows, and so on. So very useful piece of equipment to use. Now, before we get into our next section, our next topic, I just want to talk about very, very basic lighting setups. Okay. So typically, if you're photographing, you know, using a one light setup, you're going to have something similar to this. Not exactly like this, perhaps, but similar to this, where you've got a one large light using either a softbox or some kind of diffusion material directly on front of your subject, perhaps placed a little bit above it, and you're just photographing away. A very simple one light setup. If you want to use something a little bit more complicated, you can start looking at using one light and a reflector. So here we've got a setup where we've got our key light coming in from the left hand side, but we're bouncing the light back onto the subject, lifting the shadows using our reflector. And a reflector basically acts as our fill light. So it brings the light back onto the subject. So that's a setup with a one light and a reflector. Two lights, you're essentially doing the same thing. You've got one light that's going to be acting as a key light, and you've got your second light acting as a fill light. Or you can have, of course, have both of them outputting at the same power and being at the same distance, which will just give you a much more balanced fill light type of photograph. But by placing the lights at different distances and having larger light sources, you also change the quality of the light. You can influence the shadows in the photograph here as well. And remember, the further away the light source, the more the light is going to fall off. So if you're finding that, say for example, you're having a difficult time adjusting the power of your fill light, simply move it further away, and that will help to reduce the light output onto your subject. A little bit more complicated, a tree light setup here. So what we would use a tree light setup, well, in this example, for we've got our key light, we have a smaller fill light here to lift the shadows, but we also then have a third light lighting up the background. So we might find that we want to add perhaps say a halo type of effect to our subject. We might use the light to light up a background. These are just very, very simple basic ideas when it comes to lighting. We're going to have a look at them a lot more in detail when it comes to the next lesson. I just want to give you some idea of how you can start placing these lights together to create different light setups. There's so many you can check out online as well if you're struggling, but I also recommend, just experimenting. Now, it also, of course, comes down to how many lights you have available to you, but you can do a lot using one light. Okay, you can do a huge amount using one light. You can give yourself so many more options by simply bringing in a reflector as well. So if you don't know where to begin, one light is fine to go with, and a reflector as well will absolutely give you a lot of versatility when it comes to doing different setups. Now, so moving on to topic 2, let's talk about lighting for products and jewelry. So like everything when you're doing a shoot, you should have some type of plan in mind. So first of all, think about your product. What is the purpose of the photograph? So what are you photographing? Is it something that you're photographing for a client? Is it something that you're photographing for yourself? Who do you think you want to buy it? Is it just something that you're doing for your portfolio? What is the purpose of the photograph? I mean, are you just there to photograph to display the object so it can be sold? Or are you going to do something a little bit more maybe conceptual with it to show off your advertising skills? Make sure you choose an appropriate background. Again, if it's just for kind of catalog photography, you're going to be wanting to go with your plain white backgrounds. If you've got a little bit of color in the objects, you might look at pastel type of backgrounds, light pinks, light whites, light greens and so on. Just add a little bit of color too. Or you can use much louder colors if it's a much more kind of fun, playful type of object. If you're shooting multiple products, simply set up your phone on a tripod and just keep your settings consistent. Don't keep changing things around. You're just basically going to be swapping in and out your different projects, photographing them, rotating them so that you get all the different types of angles. It's not going to be very, very creative, but if you start moving the phone around and start changing the angles, you're going to cause issues and you're going to cause problems with consistency. So again, don't change the lights between shots. So again, if you're photographing lots of different objects, keep your lighting setup consistent. If you start changing the lights, you might find it difficult to go back to the exact way you had them set up before. Only change the lights after you've completed photographing using that particular light setup. So don't start changing your setups after every single shot. Photograph in bulk and then start changing your lights. Remember to photograph the product from all angles, so people do want to see all the different angles, particularly when it comes to, say, clothes. I'm sure if you've ever bought clothes online, you scroll through, you want to make sure that it looks good from every single angle. So remember to photograph it from all the different angles. Create a shot list so that you can check off and make sure that you have photographed everything that you need to. Make sure you've got everything covered. And don't overcomplicate the lighting. Again, unless you're doing something that's a little bit more conceptual, you're doing it for your portfolio, you want to get a little bit more creative, you should try to keep things basic as possible when it comes to photographing, because again, thinking about what's the product or what's the purpose, it's for someone to buy the product, so you want to just keep things nice and simple and easy. Now, again, you're going to need to have the right equipment. So macro lenses are going to be very, very useful. We're all aware of our macro lenses now at this stage. Portrait lenses and telephoto lenses can also be very, very useful. When it comes to photographing jewelry, though, in particular, you're definitely going to want to look at a macro lens, because you want to get that finer detail. You know, that's what people want to see. They want to see that quality. They want to see that finer detail in the product. And remember your moment lenses as well. So, I mean, I think if you can afford it, of course, it's worth just buying your kind of 4 standard lenses here. So we've got our wide angle, we've got a fisheye, we've got our macro, and we've got our telephoto lens. So that's a great collection there that you can use if you're really after the highest quality photographs. Now, again, I'll stress it, we're not affiliated with them at all, but if you look up anything to do with your mobile, your smartphone photography, moment lenses are always going to be the ones that are going to be recommended. And so if you're simply after professional quality, and say you've spent a huge amount of money on your smartphone, you know, if you can afford it, spend a little bit extra and get yourself those quality lenses as well. Now, we mentioned light boxes earlier. They're a really solid investment if you're running a small business. As we mentioned, you can have ones where you can change the light setup, or it's just simply built in. They're very easy to set up and go. They're not versatile for creative photography, you know, so don't expect to do too much with them if you're into doing kind of more creative type of work. They're very much designed with a single purpose in mind, which is to simply photograph something that you're going to sell. So if you're putting stuff on eBay, putting stuff on Amazon, a light box is what you're going to use. So it's really, really simple and straightforward to use. Now, if you want to do a little bit more, it is possible to change the backgrounds and add simple backgrounds into light boxes as well. So when thinking about backgrounds, you can make your own. First of all, it's just a case of getting different pieces of card, and popping them into the light box or popping them into your lighting setup. But think about complementing the color of the object. So again, in the image here, we've got some purple, purple beads here. So, the photographer has added a little bit of a purple background into it just to complement that image. The color works here. Grey, silver, white, black, gold. These are your classic colors for jewellery. Black and white in particular, but you might experiment with grey if you're photographing watches. Gold, again, if you're photographing anything gold. So think about these types of backgrounds when it comes to photographing jewellery. Think about the product again. Is it elegant? So is it sophisticated? Is it going to just want to have a kind of a simple black white type of background? Is it masculine? You might use masculine colors. Or is it feminine? You might use more feminine types of colors for the product. Okay, so these are things that still exist, unfortunately, in the world of photography, assigning colors to masculine or feminine. Of course, that's always changing, so always be sure to research on that. But, it does still exist out there. I mean, if you ever look at advertising for cars in particular, I always find that they very much market cars to either men or women, and it very much influences the color and the look and everything, in the photograph of the car. All of these will influence your lighting decisions then as well. So you may need to change your lighting setup based on the type of background that you're using. So again, a black background, you're probably going to go with a key light setup. A white background or colourful background like this, you're going to have more of a fill light type of setup. Now, if you want to add a little bit more creativity to your backdrops, you can also go with reflective surfaces as well. So things like glass, metal, even water can be used too. You can also, of course, add it in post editing. But if you've got a sheet of glass, you could simply just put a black or a bit of white card underneath that glass, your product on top of it, and it should give you a little bit of a reflection then. But usually, and especially in a shot like this, it is typically added in post editing too, something which we cover in our Photoshop course. But it's just something to play around with and to consider as well. Now, Of course, color. Use color to grab attention, and it does allow a lot more creativity when it comes to your setups. The key to getting good color photographs when it comes to product photography is to understand color theory. So color theory is something we cover in great detail in our other courses, in our full photography course, in the graphic design course, and the Photoshop course as well. So it's very much all about design, but it's about how you use color and how colors relate to each other, and it also goes into the meanings behind colors as well. But just to give you some basic ideas around color theory, so for example, we have a color wheel here. Now, these are the primary colours of light, because we're dealing with photography. The primary colours of pigment, you would replace the green with yellow, but you know they're quite close as it is anyway. But basically, you know, for example, triadic colour theory, you're picking three colours based on a triangle applied to your colour wheel. These three colours should work harmoniously. Complementary, when you've got you know, one color, the opposite color should be a complementary color, and it always is. So for example, a classic one here is blue and yellow. Of course, you know, anywhere you pick an opposite, you should find that those two colors work together. Analogous is when you're picking three or more colors that are basically side by side on the color wheel. So for example, these three colors here, they're autumnal type of colors, and they would work very, very well together if you were doing something that was quite warm. So you know, three colors together along this the color wheel, analogous colors. Tetradic. These ones are, as you can see, a rectangle. So you're picking four colors based on a rectangular type of shape here. And then we have split complementary. So like complementary, but you split it, you know, to create this type of shape, this wide type of shape, and you should get three colors that work together. I say four there, but it's three colors that work together. So definitely check out the color wheel and color theory a little bit more as well, to get some ideas when it comes to your arrangement of your backgrounds, your products, and certainly color theory, very important to understand when we're doing arrangement for our food photography as well. Now, so just before we get on to our final topic, let's have a quick look at what's coming up in the next lesson. We are going to be talking all about photographing people in the studio. Now, you won't need to have a DSLR or something as complex as this. We'll be able to do great studio photography in the comfort of our own homes. So we'll be picking up where we leave off at the end of this lesson with our studio photography. Now, of course, our skills progression as well. So we're halfway through our module number 2 now. So our skills are almost at the halfway point now as well. So keep going and fill out those skills to their maximum. So moving on to our final topic, let's talk all about food photography. And you know, smartphones are really made for food photography, and everything we've kind of covered now up to this stage should give you an idea of how to approach and how to light your food photography. So again, really, when it comes to food photography, it's going to be all about your preparation. So make a list of what you want to shoot, plan what food you want to shoot, sketch out angles even, consider your prop placement, consider your lighting. Be prepared to shoot for hours when it comes to food photography. And, you know, what's the theme of it? You know, is it going to be kind of editorial? What's the type of food you're photographing? Is it going to be more commercially based? You know, are we trying to sell this food? Or is it just going to be fun? Is it going to be for yourself? Is it going to be for a portfolio? Or where are these photographs going to be seen? Who's going to be looking at them? So think about these things when you're making your food shoot. I mean, if it's something that's just going on Instagram, you know, consider that as well. Consider what people want to see. When it comes to where you should photograph, natural light works best for natural ingredients. So if you're making something at home, you know, it's quite healthy, lots of vegetables, lots of fruits, you want to pick somewhere where you maybe you've got some nice window light, with some kind of rustic type of background. Artificial lights will allow more control, like in this setup here, but they'd be better for more processed food like candy and so on. And of course, a combination of both can be used effectively. You can always use a reflector using natural window light as well. And as I said, it's a must-have piece of equipment. Really, if there's anything you get from this lesson, you should buy yourself a reflector. Think about your ingredients. You're not going to be eating this food, so you're going to be buying purely for the photograph. You want to use natural ingredients, of course. Buy as fresh as possible as well. So, if possible, buy from a local market where the food is going to be fresh. Make sure you have plenty, make sure you have enough. Don't forget your garnishes as well, because they're really what are going to add to the photograph. So your things like your salt, your pepper, sauces, flour, sugar, all those kind of things as well. They just add a little bit more to the photograph. Herbs, of course, as well. Bread is a great filler, so if you're trying to fill up a little bit of space in an image, add some bread. Bread always looks good, and it's really good for taking up some space. And fruit and vegetables are going to naturally add a lot of colour to the shot. If you are using sauces, you'll need to thicken them up, so you might put in a little bit of cream into them, mix them all up so that they appear quite thick. Remember, you're not going to be eating this food at all. Get some props, plenty of extra props to shoot. So your things like your plates, knives, spoons, sporks, toothpicks are very, very useful. Is it sporks? What I meant was spoons. You can absolutely get sporks as well. Herbs, flour, ramekins, all these extra little things will certainly help, to fill out the shot as well. And just add a little bit more, give you more room to play around with your compositional elements in the photograph. Think about the arrangement then of these ingredients. Get artistic with it. Get geometrical with it as well. You see this type of photograph repeated often now. I see, with the cereal, with the kind of the smoothie in a bowl type of thing, very, very carefully arranged, so it's very, very pretty. Think about this as well, and think about where you're placing the different animals to disperse your colors a little bit more. You don't want to have one big block of colors and then everything else around it looks quite bare and quite sparse. Styling then as well is going to be very important. So when you're adding your garnishes, your oils, add a little bit of grilling to meats and so on to make them look more appealing. But take care with your styling. So if you ever watch like Master Chef or any of those cooking shows, when it comes to time to giving the chefs the food to taste, the visuals on the food is very, very important as well, almost as important as the food itself. So you see them taking their time with it, using tweezers to carefully place flowers, herbs and so on as well. You should be thinking about this when it comes to your food photography too. So some tools that will help: tweezers, paper towels to wipe away any excess oil, paint brushes to paint on any oil or any garnish, water spritzers, particularly if you've got like say glasses of water or glasses of anything really, just to add a little bit of water to the edge of the glass. Glycerin, mix that 50-50, will help to for bottles and sauces to help it stick so it doesn't go too runny. Okay, cooking spray and oil, of course, as well, just to add a little bit of a gloss to your meats in particular. Food colorings can be mixed with a huge variety of different types of food to change the color of them. Toothpicks to hold everything together, and eyedroppers to carefully place drops of liquid strategically over your food. Also, of course, add a human element. As we've seen, people like to see other people, so it's nice to see the process. Helps us to connect more, see where the food is coming from and make it more desirable. So think about who is making the food and add that human element into it as well. Just to add something that more that we can connect to. Food is a lot about memory as well, so So we have associations with people, usually with our mothers, our fathers, our grandparents, when it comes to baking, when it comes to food. So add that human element in it as well to bring back those kind of memories for the viewer as well. Now, what food photography is famous or infamous for is faking it, and there's a huge list of tricks that photographers use when it comes to making food photography more effective. Cardboard spacers will add height to food. Motor oil is used as a syrup substitute because it doesn't absorb into pancakes. We talked about toothpicks, they hold everything in place. Makeup sponges can add height to a burger. Vegetable oil makes juicy meat. Wood glue in particular is used as a milk substitute. Dish soap creates lasting foam in fizzy drinks. Corn syrup and food colouring can be used to create ice cream that doesn't melt. Super glue repairs tears in bird skin. Browning liquid can be used to shoot raw birds without roasting, so they look very, very plump. Shaving cream is used as whipped cream that doesn't melt. Ramekins can be used to keep garnishes and surfaces on the surfaces of soup, so that you actually put the ramekins into the soup and keep the garnishes on top. Tampons are used to create steam. Mashed potato can also be used as ice cream as well, vanilla ice cream in particular, and as I mentioned there earlier, shaving foam can be used as whipped cream. So that's just some tips, and I mean there's so many other tricks that photographers and food photographers used to get their food looking perfect. Also, you can undercook meats to give them that plumpness as well. So if you do want to cook them, don't cook them for the full amount of time. Undercook them a little bit, and it'll help to retain a lot of that plumpness in the meat too. So that was another jam-packed lesson, a huge amount of information we've been taking in over the last few lessons. Coming up in our next lesson, Studio Photography Part 2, we're going to talk about how to photograph people in the studio. We'll talk about how to photograph newborns in the studio as well, and we'll look at different lighting styles that you can try out as well, and there's hundreds of them to test out. So we'll talk all about that in the next lesson. So well done on completing lesson number 5. Get in touch with us as usual if you have any questions, any problems, anything you want to give us a bit of feedback on. Your challenge for this lesson is straightforward enough. I want you to take a food photo. So it can be something you've cooked yourself, it can be something that you've faked yourself, but I want you to follow the guidelines and everything that we had a look at throughout this lesson. So a straightforward enough one, simply take a food photograph. So that is the end of our lesson number 5. Well done on making it this far. I'll see you all back again very, very soon for lesson number 6, part 2 of studio photography. So until then, take care of yourselves and bye bye.